This GPU is legendary. How long has the GTX 1060 been sitting on top of the Steam hardware survey as the most popular GPU in the world? Now granted, there's a few different versions of the GTX 1060. We've got the 3GB version and the 6GB version. I think there's also some Chinese 5GB version. I'm not too sure on that. This video is going to focus on the 6GB version because, well, for one thing, I have that one, so I can actually include a whole bunch of actual I did it myself benchmarking data to give you my opinions, as well as the fact that honestly 3GB these days, guys, a lot of games are going to be really struggling there, and I think my recommendation is upgrade if you have any chance at doing that financially. I know the GPU market right now sucks. But anyway, the 1066GB. In a lot of games these days, the problem is, well, you can hit 60 FPS. There's a lot of trade-offs that you have to make. If we look at some games that came out in the last couple of years, we can get a good idea of what it'll also look like into the future, at least into 2022. Because while certain games often take a giant leap in terms of hardware requirements, either due to really pushing graphical boundaries or bad optimization, whichever way you want to go on that, we see games like Cyberpunk at the end of 2020 really pushing that boundary. And well, hey, let's take a look at that game. Can the 1060 hit 60 FPS in that game? Well, yes, but at some serious trade-offs. You're really going to have to turn pretty much everything down. Sometimes you can keep textures up in a lot of games because of that 6GB of VRAM. But you have to turn so much down that, like, is it really worth it? But you can, for the most part, hit a 60 FPS target. However, in a lot of games like Cyberpunk, and this could go for other things like Red Dead Redemption 2, another older game that's still very demanding graphically and still looks quite nice when the settings are turned up, well, that's the issue again. If you turn up the settings, even just playing at 1080p, a lot of times you're really only going to be hitting a 30 FPS target, although you might be able to get into the, the 40 range, and if you have a variable refresh rate monitor, that might help smooth that out. So that's the issue. We already have, in the more graphically demanding games, kind of hit the limit where the 1060 is gonna maybe get you 60 FPS if you turn everything down, or still look pretty decent if you're willing to play at 30 FPS. Now, there's also multiplayer games that we can look at, and honestly, it can still, again, perform fairly well. You can usually get over 60 FPS, but once again, this is requiring turning everything down, and in the cases of games like Halo Infinite, having to actually even render scale down below 1080p, although the render scaler in that game does look quite good. And games with FSR, for example, can help out. Also, NVIDIA does now have their basically FSR competitor. We're not talking DLSS, but NVIDIA image scaling, which you can run on the driver side for pretty much any game. And this has similar results to FSR, although since it's implemented on the driver, you're going to be applying that render scale to the actual HUD and menus of the game and post-processing effects, unlike a native implementation of FSR, or we'll probably see some native implementations in engine of NIS in the future. So in a lot of games now, the issue is, well, if you have to run it at low settings to hit 60 FPS, is that going to be worth it to you? So I think you might be in one camp of, I already own a GTX 1060, Can I hang on to it another year and hope prices eventually come down on GPUs? Let's hope. Or you might be in the camp of, I don't even have a GPU, I'm just trying to build my first PC, or my PC is so out of date, there's no value in the one I currently have. Well, then the question is, like, if all you can afford is a GTX 1060, is it even worth buying? Well, let's look at the people who already own one. I think if you already own one, you've got to really ask yourself, are you okay targeting less than 60 FPS? Because, as I said, I think graphical requirements will get pushed up, and I think when is this going to really take effect? I think it's when console games stop targeting the last gen, right? PS4 and Xbox One. Once they stop targeting those for backwards compatibility, that's where you're really going to start struggling with your GTX 1060 to even play the game at low settings. But as long as they're still targeting the PS4 and the Xbox One, a 1060 performs pretty well relative to those consoles, which means that playing the game at 1080p low settings will probably still be something that you can do for several years to come in most big releases, which, developers are still going to be mostly targeting those older consoles. But we will start seeing some games that aren't targeting them. And that's where I think we're going to start seeing games that the 1060 just can't hit 60 FPS without, going down to 720p or something like that. And we're already seeing it struggle in games, for example, like Halo Infinite, where you're really going to have to take advantage of the resolution scaling if you actually want to get 60 FPS. But this is where we could also take advantage of how bad the GPU market is. And you're like, wait, what? Take advantage of that? Yeah. Your 1060 might actually sell for a good used price locally on Facebook Marketplace, or maybe you go on eBay or something like that. But you can probably fetch more money for this than you might realize as a used sale, and then that can help you fund an upgrade. And upgrading to like a 3060 at the prices that you tend to see them at might be still out of the question. But swapping over to maybe AMD with an RX 6600, if you're looking to buy a new card that can sometimes be found in stock for a sort of reasonable price, at least in this market. Okay, it's not reasonable, but if you're funding it by selling your old 1060 for an inflated price, then the upgrade difference might be reasonable. Sometimes you'll see these bundled with like a motherboard. And on that topic, if you're on a computer that was maybe already upgraded to a 1060 from an older system, like your CPU, honestly, like looking at a whole new build or a pre-built is another option, but that's really a topic for another video. What I'm getting at though is, like, I have an RX 6600 that I review quite a bit on this channel, and that can hit 1080p 60 FPS, maxed out settings, occasionally tweaking something down to high instead of ultra in maybe something silly like, what was it, Icarus, which is honestly just very, very, very badly optimized. But the point is that you might be able to actually get a decent upgrade funding it through selling the 1060. Now let me talk to you people who are thinking about, should I buy a GTX 1060? Well, if you can get a really good deal on it used, but you really need to be thinking about, since the used market can, especially locally, can fluctuate quite a bit, just look at something that gives you like a relative performance chart. I like the one at Tech Power Up. It's not perfect, but keep your eye on that. Also keep VRAM in mind though. The 6GB is a big deal. And 4GB cards, I really wouldn't recommend buying into a 4GB card these days. I would really say 6GB should be your bottom end. But then also the actual GPU performance. And again, looking at Tech Power Up there is a good way to get an idea here. And I think buying into this is fine at the right price, but look at, is it worth paying a little bit more to jump up significantly in terms of the actual performance? Because one thing that's affecting the used prices on the market isn't just their gaming performance, it's also mining performance. So sometimes a card, the used prices don't always make perfect sense in terms of a gaming performance chart, right? That's all I'm saying. And I can't give you specific advice in the used market. I will say, like I said, that the 1060 6GB still can definitely play games at 60 FPS barely right now in the more demanding ones. But if you're really looking for a 30 FPS kind of experience for the next few years, I think it'll absolutely get you there. So definitely consider it, but really consider the price and other alternatives, because this thing is getting a little bit old. What do you guys think? Do you have one of these? Are you thinking about buying one of these? Let me know in the comment section, and I hope that you have an excellent day.